This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Jordan Girth here from the National Weather Service Office of Observations. Thank you for joining us for the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series. This is session number 73. Today's presentation is the usage of GOES Meso-Sectors. The presenter, Chad Gravelle, Techniques Development Meteorologist at Southern Region Headquarters, and our facilitator is Dan Lindsay, the GOES-R Program Scientist. Before we dive into today's presentation, some news from our solar ultraviolet imager. This morning, there was a X1.0 solar flare that was detected by GOES-16, and you can see it there on the animation. You might know that the biggest flares are X-class flares based on the classification system. The smallest ones are A-class, followed by B, C, M, and X. And it is similar to the Richter scale. Each letter represents a 10-fold increase in energy output. So very interesting. No alerts from the Space Weather Prediction Center yet, but if you're interested in all things GOES, there is an X-class flare on Suvi. Okay, let's get back to the program. A few reminders before we get started with today's presentation is that this session is being recorded. There will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation, particularly from forecast offices. We would really appreciate our regional headquarters and field staff to weigh in. Question, comment, whatever, get it in the chat or indicate that you'd like to speak your question aloud and we'll get to you. We're always looking for future presenters. The training team can help create training materials that may be unavailable, and Brian Mata, the Office of the Chief Learning Officer, can help regarding that. Thanks to our Tower S team, particularly Kashad Bowman, Lee Byerly, the Office of the Chief Learning Officer, GOES-R, and the JPSS program for their support of the book club. We couldn't do it without them, particularly thanks to Kashad for all of his behind-the-scenes work. Without further ado, as I already mentioned, Dr. Chad Gravelle is a Techniques Development Meteorologist in the Science and Tech Division at the Weather Service Southern Region Headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. He develops, implements, and manages advanced techniques for preparing forecasts and warnings, emphasizing applying new data sets and technology to improve forecasts that drive decision support services. He also initiates, plans, coordinates, and oversees the transfer of new and emerging tech from the research community to the operational environment. And as you may know previously, the GOES-R Satellite Liaison at the OPG in Kansas City. So Chad, I know you've been here a few times. Welcome back.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Kashad. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I think we're gonna have a little fun today. I'm glad that Kashad and the Tower S team asked me to come back, and sometimes they say, what do you want to talk about? Other times they don't. I don't remember which one this is, but we're going to be talking about, how Weather Service forecast offices are using GOES 16-17 mesoscale domain sector imagery. And this is more than a pretty picture. And I know that some of these loops may not be coming across super well. I'm going to try to get the slides posted where the YouTube videos posted on the VLab, so you can download them if you like them. But yeah, this is actually really useful information, and we'll talk more about that as we kind of get going. All right, so here, let me hide this bad boy, this side panel for me. I'm sorry about that, everyone. Nope, I don't want to leave the meeting. Okay, let me go back. Okay, well, I'll figure it out. Okay, so we gotta, if we're gonna talk about 1 minute imagery, we need to talk about GOES-14. And the reason why is because between 2012 and 2015, the GOES-14 imager was occasionally placed in experimental mode. And what I mean by that is some years we'd get about a couple week period. Other years we'd get maybe 2 periods of a month each. It kind of just depended on budget and things like that. But what it allowed us to do was basically get 26 images, and I think it was 26 consecutive images. And Dan, feel free to fact check me on this. but like every 30 minutes, which was pretty close. There'd be a little gap at the maybe near the bottom and the top of the hour, and then we get another set. And it was basically the closest thing we could do to simulate the temporal resolution of what GOES-16 and 17 would have, basically the GOES-R series. And and because of that, it was a big deal. So like, places like the Operations Proving Ground, I'll talk a little more about that later, the Hazardous Weather Test Bed, we would bring forecasters in to evaluate this imagery, basically for its usefulness. We even, after a while, like in the 2014, 2015 time period, we even got it flowing into the forecast offices, which wasn't an easy task either because it was a non-operational data set, but obviously a very important one. And here's an image of some developing convection in May of 2014 across Kentucky, Western Kentucky, that you can see here. So that, again, a big deal. And because of that big deal, a lot of things ended up happening. And one of them was innovation. And there's a quote down there from Dave Andra, the former NWS Norman, Oklahoma MIC, "Today we're going to innovate." And that day was February 18th, 2016. So that really should say 2016. But there was 1 minute imagery from GOES-14 on that day. The forecast office found out about it, I think, the day before. And basically, it allowed them, with a very, very handy ITO, Aaron Anderson, who's probably one of the best, allowed them to basically use GOES-14 1 minute imagery, the 3.9 band, to detect fire starts on a very, very bad fire day and send notifications in real time to the state of Oklahoma, the state of Texas, etc. They did this within a few hours using this data, and you can read all about it in the NWA JOM article here. Innovation ended up happening. So it wasn't like always getting forecasters comfortable with this data. That was a big deal, but things actually ended up coming up from it, and again, preparing you for GOES-16. Another thing that came from it is when I was at the Operations Proving Ground, I brought forecasters in, and the OPG brought forecasters in between February and April of 2015, and we used past cases. So all these were in retrospect. But what we ended up doing is the goal of the evaluation was basically to provide both quantitative and qualitative guidance to NWS management. So like the Science Services Division of the Weather Service, each region has one, and the SSD chiefs. Excuse me. And it was really about how can this satellite imagery with a refresh rate of every minute impact NWS forecaster decision making? Because there was a lot of people in this time period that said, that's too much data, it's data overload. Now, what we learned is that it really wasn't data overload, because you weren't inspecting every image like you were with radar. It was just completing a more complete loop of what you were looking at. Okay, so we did that. This is all written up in AMS WAF. You can read all about it. Again, another big deal in order to get ready for GOES-16. Okay, so then GOES-16 data starts flowing pre-operational, so like in experimental mode on March 2nd, 2017. Okay, about a year after, maybe 6 months after launch or so, right? And we got data flowing. There were some problems that were resolved eventually, but 4 days later, a really, really, really bad fire day happened on March 6, 2017, where 1 million acres of, landscape were burned across Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, and it was a very, very bad day. And there's a YouTube video here. You can watch a 10-minute YouTube video that myself and Kim Runk put together for Dr. Uccellini, shortly after that happened. But it was a big day, and you can see why. Here's some imagery from that day. You can see how fast GOES-16, with better spatial, temporal, and even very sensitive 3.9 band compared to legacy GOES, just is able to see these fires. And getting this imagery every minute allowed forecasters to really anticipate a wind shift from a cold front that was going to impact these fires. And I'll let it run through one time, and you'll be able to see that wind shift happen in a couple minutes. But this fire in particular ended up racing to the southeast. You can see the wind shift begins there, and then all of these fires end up just changing, direction dramatically. And there's no skipped images there. That is how fast they ended up changing direction, because the winds were very strong behind that cold front. And this is a nice little quote here, and I think it's good. It's from Aaron Johnson, the Sioux at WFO Dodge City, and this is in that other video that I talked about. But remember, this is 4 days after getting this data. This was an excellent hands-on demonstration of the capability GOES-16 provides to detect wildfires in real time, how to quickly apply these data for IDSS. Aaron goes on to say they were calling, emergency managers and fire departments and letting them know about these fire starts even before they were being received on, from 911 calls. So you can just see the impact that in 4 days GOES-16 had. Okay, so this is like the timeline of 1 minute imagery. And the reason why this ended up happening is because of all the work that had done from GOES-14. So if we have anyone to thank about GOES-16 imagery, 1 minute imagery, it's probably GOES-14. So we need to remember that, right? Remember where we came from. So then let's fast forward. I know we're talking about fire quite a bit here, and there's a reason for that. There was a lot of question after we started seeing the data and how useful it was for fire detection, is how fast can GOES-16 and GOES-17 really sense these fires? Well, we had a great opportunity. Todd Lindley, the Sioux at Norman, worked with another one of his meteorologists and myself and a whole bunch of partners, including core partners from university as well, including Chris Schmidt from SIMS, on really trying to see. So there was a unique opportunity because Alert Wildfire, and for those of you who don't know, it's a series of basically fire surveillance video cameras that are all across California, and they're pointed in different areas, but they're infrared, but they basically can tell you the exact second a fire starts if it's pointed at that fire. Well, that just so happened to be the Kincaid fire. So it basically sensed this fire at a time, and on the next GOES-17 scan, and we only have 52 seconds because we know when the fire started and we know when the scan occurred, and in between that time period it was 52 seconds. It could have been faster, but that's just the capability of the instrument right now. But on the very next 1 minute scan, we could see that fire. And this is probably, I think this is the only paper that is kind of like really corroborated that and how fast it was, which is pretty remarkable in my opinion, and which is why GOES-16, 17 and the GOES-R series of satellites is such a game changer for fire. It's more sensitive to fire. It has better spatial resolution, and obviously the 1 minute imagery, you're getting information every minute. You can see that information very, very quickly. But it's not all about fire. It's also about monitoring convection. And I'm only talking about the big guys here, like the most useful you know, where the Weather Service really finds usefulness from 1 minute imagery. But it's also for monitoring convection. So it's looking for things like billow clouds. You can see those in this. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse. Actually, let me make sure that you can. I'm going to do this, and hopefully you can see that. You can see these billow clouds here, okay? These are very stable clouds. They're very important because they're usually along a warm front. Where billows crisscross, you can see that there was some here and there's some here underneath this mid-level, like kind of like strato Q moving through. That's where storm relative helicity is even more enhanced. Okay, so we can really see things about the environment in 1 minute imagery. Okay, well, let's move a little further east. Well, we have also horizontal convective rolls moving in to this area where things are less statically stable, right? And then another thing you can see is you can see some of these towers that are orphaning off. Okay, so these towers that are in this general area where my cursor is, they're maybe not strong enough yet to break through that less statically stable air, okay, because there's still a little cap in place. But one, they're helping erode the cap, okay, with environmental cooling. Maybe they're orphaning off because there's so much shear that's overtaking the updraft. But with time, in these instances, deep convective development usually ends up occurring. But what you can see is this, as the mesoanalyst, you can really do a lot of things here, okay? With surface obs, you can obviously do a quick surface analysis, and you can see where, even though you're in the warm sector here, you're very stable with these billow clouds. And it's really in the adjacent areas where these billow clouds tend right here at the end, they start to erode. That means we're destabilizing the atmosphere under them. It's still statically stable. There's still probably a cap in place, but there's good storm relative helicity in that area as well. And then just so you can kind of see what the radar looked like at the end of this loop, there was nothing there. You can see kind of these towers orphaning off with very low reflectivities, right? But you kind of can see, you can get the idea of what we're looking at here. And there's not much on radar. This is convective development, okay? But that allows you as a mesoanalyst to basically really highlight an area, talking about all the things that I was looking at in the 1 minute imagery to say we have a heightened threat for potentially tornadoes and severe thunderstorms in this area based on all those things. And this is something that the mesoanalyst can do and monitor as we go through. And what ended up happening, well, you can see that there was a couple tornado warnings just to the east, or just to the northeast of Des Moines. And there ended up being 20 tornadoes in this area. But it's just the power of 1 minute imagery. It's more than a pretty picture. There's atmospheric processes that we can see that are very difficult to see even in 5 minute imagery. They're just not as easy, right? We're getting so many more images to create that movie a bit more realistic. What we did is then, because we've learned so much about convection and 1 minute imagery, is we have a whole 40-minute module on using satellite imagery and really being able to identify and understand these physical processes that are going on for the mesoanalyst. So, the Weather Service has developed, along with, you can see the contributors there on the top right, a mesoscale environmental analysis course, and that is one module that that they really go into talking about. Okay, so we're going to wrap things up soon. And this is kind of with the talk of the interesting part, I think, of these slides. So what I like to do with our SUs in Southern Region and DOES and sometimes CWSU MICs like I did here, is I like to take the pulse of their feelings on certain topics. So I did this on Monday with our SUs, and 24 of 32 SUs responded. 2 of our 7 CWSU MICs responded, with their feedback on a couple questions that I'll talk about. And I call them flash polls. They're basically 2 or 3 questions. They take SUs about, and DOEs and CWC MACs literally less than a minute to answer. All I want is their rough thinking, and I give them a box to add a little more detail if they feel fit. I call them flash polls, and it's a really good way for us to gauge the pulse on topics. So here's one. In general, so this is the first question I asked them on Monday. And remember, 24 of the 32 SUs and 2 DOEs responded, okay? In general, how often would you estimate that meteorologists use GOES-16 or 17 1-minute imagery when a domain is over your WFO or center operations, okay? And you can see the breakup there. So every time, most of the time is pretty good. It's about 70%. And I think that most of us would be happy with that. The part that I think is somewhat interesting is there's still like 30%. We still got that 1/3 out there that doesn't seem, and this is in general, like I'm asking these SUs and CWC MACs in general what their forecasters do. But 30% say they don't really, they use it some of the time or not usually, okay? And I'm like, all right, so that's interesting. I wanted to gauge the pulse. It was probably a little, I thought the 1/3 might be a little higher, so I was somewhat happy about that. Every time, most of the time, I like that being the 2/3. I'm gonna be honest with you. I thought it would be a little less than that on the high end, so that's good. But then the second question I asked was a follow-up. For those meteorologists not using the 1-minute imagery in general, what are the reasons? What are those reasons? And I gave them a list of reasons. They could choose any one they wanted. They could choose multiple. And then I gave them a box they could actually fill in another reason. So here are some of those results. Meteorologist does not know the domain covers them. 77%. To me, this was mind-blowing. 77% of those respondents, so 26, so basically, 2 or 3/4 of them said that their meteorologists don't know when the domain covers them. Okay, we can fix that, I think, as a group. I think that's something to talk about, right? There's things that we can maybe do in AWIPS. Maybe there's things that the regional operations centers can do. I think that's fixable, I hope, okay? Still interesting. Too difficult to maintain multiple procedures in AWIPS. So this is something that I've talked about. Like, I wish that there was a way that we could just overlay the imagery, CONUS imagery, and put the Meso-Sector domains down and just make them load one or visible imagery, and they'd have it if it was over them. It's almost like forcing them to use it. There's pros and cons to that, but I wish that was at least an option, because it would make forecasters, it would be easier for them to manage their procedures, okay? Because right now, what they have is 3 procedures for the same thing a lot of times. They won't load the data. They won't load CONUS in both mesoscale domain sectors in a procedure, and I'll give you one reason why, and we'll get to that later, okay? Spoiler, it begins with an A. So it's basically, so what they do is they separate them. So it's hard for them to manage. If they want to update one, they got to update 3. Not the best thing. Meteorologist does not see the value of using the 1-minute imagery. This is a good one. I like it at 1 person, 4% basically. Okay, very good. Not enough training use cases. There was like 3 or 4 people that kind of clicked on that guy. Okay, we can work on that, I think. I think there's always room for improvement there. Data every minute is too much for this meteorologist to assimilate. This is another good one. It kind of like proves our point where you're not analyzing every image like you are radar data. You're analyzing all 30 images of 1-minute imagery as a collective, right? To see how features evolve. That's good, right? That's what I would assume. But one of the big things was the other, okay? And 5 people talked about AWIP slowdowns, okay? Now, this is a big thing if you're on like Weather Service AWIPS on the Weather Service AWIPS forum. There's some ongoing issues. I don't know them with a lot of detail, but this is, this kind of like deals with number 2, right? Where a forecaster won't get a procedure done and then make sure that the CONUS, the mesoscale domain 1 and 2 are all loaded. Even if they offload them, there's either right or wrong, there's some kind of perception out there that there's AWIP slowdowns, and maybe that's something that we can help with. I'm not sure. Again, this is just the data from the flash poll. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. It looks like there's 10 comments in there. I cannot see them right now. And let's talk about some of this stuff. We can talk about the history of 1 minute data. We can talk about what has been done in the GOES 16-17 kind of era, and we can talk about the results from our flash poll.
All right, thanks a lot, Chad. First of all, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we
okay,
can.
Good. Great presentation. I like the trip through memory lane there back to the GOES-14 stuff. So, we worked a lot on that over the last 10 years. And so it's good to see that it was fruitful work. I would like to encourage everyone who has a question or a comment to please use the chat. You can type your question in and we'll get to those in just a minute. One comment, just a reminder, a week from today, on Thursday, November 4th, back at the normal time of noon Eastern, Dr. Connor Nelson, research scientist from CIRA and satellite researcher, GOES Satellite Liaison with the Weather Service Operations Proving Ground, will discuss the use of satellite data in the spring of 2021 OPG grasslands fire weather experiment and its implication for future operations. So definitely join us next week for that. Also, be sure to contact the TowerS team, primarily Lee Byerly or Kashad Bowman, for questions about Satellite Book Club or for configuration of satellite products. More information will follow in an email from the TowerS team. So with those announcements out of the way, I'll also say we're going to go past the bottom of the hour for questions. Those of you who have to take off, that's fine. But those of you who can stick around, we'll continue the discussion as long as it takes to get through all of the questions. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll to the top and start. Let's see. So there was a question about the YouTube link from Chris. I put a link there, which I think is what was being referred to. I think it was the YouTube you referred to, Chad, for Louis back in March of 2017. So if that's not correct, or if we're talking about a different YouTube, somebody can correct that. TJ pointed out that I think one of the events that you showed, maybe the one over Iowa, is part of a COMET course. GOES-R JPSS case exercise, product and capabilities for assessing convective initiation. Thank you for that reminder, TJ. Go ahead, Chad. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no. Great for sharing that, TJ. I appreciate that.
And if anybody doesn't know how to access COMET courses, let us know and we can point you in the right direction. It's a very good training resource for lots of things besides just satellite. Jammer was asking about the sample size of your poll, which I believe was 24 out of 32, which I answered.
Yeah.
Tim is reminding us of another paper, which shows some of the details of the GOES-14 SRSOs. And so, yeah, it wasn't continuous every single image every hour, but it was something like 26 out of every 30. So it didn't have the spatial resolution, but it had the temporal, close to the temporal cadence of what we actually have with GOES-16. Okay, let's see. Brian mentions that they've developed some procedures at Huntsville that layer the Meso-Sectors over the CONUS sectors, so it's easy for forecasters to switch. But AWIPS does have many memory issues, as you said, Chad, and it may not be practical to use this very often. Do you want to comment on that?
No, I mean, that's the thing. I kind of like talked about that, right? Like, and I don't know what it's hard, right? I don't know what if there's a good fix for that, right? Like, part of me wants to like say, well, maybe we need to almost like think about post-processing it and not, so we send like, but then you're sending like at every minute, like a CONUS scan. It's like, that's not practical either, right? I guess I wish there was a way that we could, have forecasters just make it a little easier. But like Brian said, it's probably not applicable either. It's a hard challenge because there are some issues with AWIPs. And it seems like it was better for a while, like a couple years ago. And then in the last like 6 months, there's been quite a bit of discussion. And again, I am not the expert there. Maybe Lee needs to chime in or somebody else that kind of can talk about, some of those, or maybe Andy Just if he's on. I'm not exactly sure.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, speaking of Andy, he also just posted a comment immediately after Brian saying that AWIP slowdowns, that's one thing he's involved with, and he created a user guide to help. So Andy, I don't know if everybody knows where to find that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if not, if there's a link or something, maybe put it in the chat or tell people how to access that, because I imagine that there will be a lot of interest.
Yeah,
Frank, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I can share that. Yeah, there's some of the problem is the fact that we pull in a lot of satellite data. A lot of it we probably don't use. Like if you're a site maybe like, let's say in Oklahoma, you're probably not using the GOES-17 mesos. You're probably just going to be stick down maybe the GOES-16 mesos. And I think if we can filter a lot of that, that would help. And that's something I'm involved with the AWIP's Performance Tiger team, is to kind of really allow WFOs to hone in on what data sets they really need to speed things up. And then there's a workstation, as both Matt Foster and I responded, there's a workstation replacement plan for next year, because right now I think generally caves only hold 6 gigabytes or so of memory, and we need to have we need to have more, because these data sets keep getting larger and larger, and it's just so much to hold on in the system.
And Andy, while you're online, there was a refresh right around when in that 2017 time period, right? When GOES-16 started flowing, isn't that correct?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yep.
Yeah.
I remember setting that up when I was ITO at La Crosse.
Yeah, Dan, the other topic I think we need to spend some time on, just before we run out of time, if we do, is you can see it. A couple minutes, 5 minutes ago, Chris said Central Region Rock will sometimes show the Meso-Sectors on the morning brief, so field offices get a visual as to they will be that day. I think that's a really, really great idea. Okay, I think I don't want to kill these forecasters, right, with this information, but I think that's a good place to do it. Chris, I don't know, you can chat. I don't know what your opinion is on like also throwing something in NWS chat, right? Like saying and I know this might be a little bit of work, but saying, okay, GOES-1 or MDS1 will begin flowing at this time, and it will cover WFOs X, Y, and Z. So it's just another place to potentially get that information. Because when I know this information's all there. That's what somebody will say. We'll go to VLab, you can see where they are all the time. But if I'm having a CWCU MIC tell me they go to College at a Page to figure out where the domains are, it's too hard, right? And exactly. So there's another issue that Frank points out. So I think having and again, this is the world according to Chad, but I think it's having, other ways to get this information. So, because that's 77%, I'm sure that a lot of people aren't happy with that, right? They're so like, are you kidding me? Like they would use it if they knew it was there. Well, a lot of it's not just about GOES-16 imagery and 17 imagery, right? Like they have other responsibilities. So we got to make it easy, to remind them. Anyway, go on, Dan. Sorry, I kind of stole things there, but I think I'd like the people to chime in about that if we could.
Yeah, and I was going to ask a question on that topic too. Is so basically, as is, the only way for people to know that there's a mesodomain over them is for them to actually check, like go to the satellite menu and click and see. Is that true?
Either that, right? That's right. There's not any kind of and that's kind of like why I talked to Chris about, or I mentioned Chris about well, maybe we need to get all the rocks to say to really just spit that information, because every WFO is required, I think, to be in those chat rooms. They should see that message. They should see their WFO highlighted. It's just another reminder, right? Like even like someone would say, well, we can do maybe a pop-up in AWIPS. That's great, but you know what? Like, I'm going to tell you, they're naggy a lot. That's what I get from that, right? You know, like the pop-ups and AWIPs are naggy, so they click them and they half the time they don't read them, maybe. Anyway, I think like Matt said, I made a procedure that loads just both and seeing where they are. And right, Matt, that's great, but like a lot of forecasters might be saying, nobody got time for that, right? Like, and I don't know. 77 is an interesting number though, percent.
All right, thanks, Chad. Let's keep
Yeah.
moving here. We got a lot of chat, which I'm happy about. Let's see. Walter points out that HydroView GHG Hydro Services running more windows open flat out crashes AWIPS. I guess that's just another comment on the on AWIPS limitations.
Yeah.
Let's see. Bob asks, do METs tend to not view 1 minute data during fair weather? Perhaps the question should be posed for active weather.
Yeah, and right, and that's probably, again, flash polls are very raw. Like I do them very quickly, and I probably could have, I probably could have maybe clarified that. That's correct. I don't know how they were answering, but regardless, I think most of them said that, yeah, the majority of the time we're using the data, which is good. I think it could have changed a little, maybe if I was had a little more clarity there. So that's fair. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think that also brings up a valid point that certainly 1 minute imagery is not useful in all situations. I think we all understand that. It's really only certain applications where it's going to provide added value, and fair weather is one where in almost all cases it's really not adding anything to 5 minute.
right. And that's why I kind of like focused on the two biggies that we've learned. That's fire and convection. And convection is a very big envelope. I mean, where I'm talking like for example, the NHC loves the 1 minute imagery at the first light images, especially for weak systems, because they really can pinpoint the center of that circulation if it's way out in the Atlantic and it's a relatively weak system. So there's other applications, but right, for time, I was kind of like focusing on the big guys.
And I'll just add one other quick point that I don't know that anybody's made is what 1 minute imagery, the other thing it provides is lower latency, because if you have a 1 minute image, you get the image, say a minute and a half later, as opposed to 5 minute, you're waiting at, 7 minutes or something. Yes, that's not a huge difference, but maybe it does make a difference if you're looking at like a developing cumulus cloud.
Yeah, and one other thing, Dan. So every month we have we have a meeting. It's a standing weather service meeting about the basically the MDS mesoscale domain sector process. And maybe we need to maybe based on this satellite book club, we need to take some time during one of those meetings to talk about, can we be a little more efficient in making sure that weather service meteorologists really know, or how can we get that information to them maybe a little more efficiently. So I can put that on myself. I know Jordan tends to be on those meetings as well, but some of us can maybe bring that topic up.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. All right, I'm going to try to keep going to get through all the questions. So Brian Curran talks about screen real estate. There's only so much screen we can use. We need a third big monitor solely dedicated to satellite data, including GLM. To me, that sounds like a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Boland says, I have some perspectives that have both as well, maybe not always overlaid, but usually in separate tabs to at least have them up when they're over our area. I guess that's more of a suggestion to how to check. Let's see. I think did you respond to this comment from Chris already?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Let's see. Matt says the crisscrossing billows in the Iowa case are much easier to pick out with the fluidity of the 1 minute compared to the 5 minute.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think, and that's the idea, right? It's just being able to see these features a little more clearer, because you're not missing data every 5 minutes.
Frank points out, hopefully the future cloud-based AWIPS concepts will be much better in handling the satellite data. We all agree. I hope that is the case, Frank. You know, I'm optimistic. I just think it'll take a little bit of time. Aaron says, I would agree about the AWIPS slowdown along with running out of RAM due to the amount of satellite data. Can there be work done to increase the RAM on the WFO AWIPS? There's also bandwidth issues in Alaska. A good question. I don't know, Chad, what do you think?
Well, I think that's kind of like what Andy and Matt Foster talked about. There's going to be a workstation refresh in the next year, which will help with that, which is good.
Great. Let's see. Matt says there is. Oh, that's exactly what you just said. Andy says the same thing. I'm behind. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Jimmy says you can also view these from different websites. College of DuPage, Ramby Slider. That's right. So that's another. There, Jimmy provides a sample link of from the Ramby Slider of some convection over Florida. Just pointing out how you can go there to check the 1 minute meso location.
Yeah.
Andy, thank you for providing the AWIPS performance guide link. It's there in the chat at 11:34 a.m. if anybody, Mountain Time at least, if anybody wants to look. Frank says a smaller issue I've got with the forecasters is the ability to connect to VLab. Yep, that was pointed out. Jordan there provided a link to NCO, which is a way to find out where the meso-sectors are at any given time. So you might want to bookmark that if you're interested in finding out. Matt says he made a procedure. I think you mentioned that a second ago, Chad.
Yeah, I did.
Chris, or get a national picture every day. That's a good idea. It's just sort of a picture of where they're located. Jeff Mannion at Central Region STI has been very proactive in emailing SUs when our WFO is in a meso-sector, which I pass along to only the ops staff working that day so as to not inundate. That sounds like a great, a great thing to do if somebody's willing to take the action to do that, Jeff.
Right. Yeah, and that's a hard one because like and I'm sure that Jeff would agree with this. I mean, we're not 24/7 at regional headquarters, right? Where, for the most of us, we're Monday through Friday. So.
Right, and a lot of those requests come out fairly early in the day. I'm not so much a 12Z guy, so yeah, I end up missing quite a few of them.
That's right. From what I remember, Jeff, you're like a 1430Z guy, right?
Yeah, I run on Pacific time.
All right, Brian Carcione, wonder if it would be possible to have a script to match the CWA against the MDS locations, but that also adds another banner or alert. Yeah, a lot of good ideas here. Frank says, can we get a simple graphic like the SBC convective outlook that one could overlay on satellite images that doesn't use too much memory?
Yeah, it's another
Matt,
interesting idea.
Here's a question, Chad, have you asked how often WFOs request an MDS?
No, but and that, so Matt, just so you might not be aware of this, that procedure is changing very soon. So the request for the most part will come through the regional operations centers, but they will request to have them do that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, all the requests coming from the WFOs outside of the national centers. So yeah, I think that's part of it. Like today, I think Lubbock requested one for fire. So they clearly know, right? But does Amarillo know they're under it? Maybe, maybe not. Caitlin couldn't maybe tell me. I think she's on. But you kind of like, it's hard, right? And that's why I think it's important to talk about.
Thanks. Yeah. So I know we're 15 minutes over. I'm going to keep going because I think this is a great discussion. If anybody needs to take off, no problem, and we'll just keep going until we're done. Let's see. So Jason Jordan says he has a set of bookmarks who would often open at the start of the shift in Chrome, and the VLab mission manager tool that was in the group made it easy to keep updated on where the meso scans are, and he could briefly, coming on shift, if there was one scheduled over the area. That's another really good suggestion, Jason. Frank, it also negates the AWIPS issue of the last image coming in blank until the proper tile arrives. I think you guys were responding to something we talked about 6 minutes ago, so kind of delayed here. Bob says, sometimes one CWA only has partial coverage of an MDS, so one will need to display more multiple satellite images to cover your entire CWA. That's absolutely true, right? Because you're never necessarily centered on the MDS. Let's see, TJ, thanks for the link. One thing to watch with the VLAB links is that they've changed so that INSEP no longer is in the address. So if you had a bookmark with an old VLAB address, be sure to use the new one. And TJ provided there at 11 or 40 minutes after the hour. Chris says, we've had some small issues with parallax where a fire isn't quite where the satellite pixels indicate that they are. Yeah, I think, I don't know, Chad, do you want to respond to that?
Well, we talked about that on a different satellite book club. So you should go check that one out if you haven't seen it. If you're in high terrain, there's going to be some parallax problem, right? And I think that's going to be actively worked on, though. It sounds like from Mike Pavlonis maybe and how that's another whole satellite book club we need, and what NWS is doing with respect to like fire weather, services, I guess.
Yeah, and the case you're referring to, I think it was when last year when the fire was jumping the Continental Divide near Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, which is 12,000 feet, and when you get a fire that high, you'll get a notable parallax error, even though with no clouds at all, just from the surface. Let's see. Brian says, has there been a service assessment or post-event hot wash that determined weather events in which 1-minute sectors are not useful?
No, I don't think that's been done. I think, I don't know. I think we have that data. That's what drives the request process, right? We have like a priority list. So like say WFO-A makes a request that's number 12, but WFO-B makes a request number 5. WFO-B is getting that sector, right? And it's that priority list is there on. It's driven by the usefulness of this data. We've worked with a lot of,
It looks to me like Chad froze. I'm going to proceed with the questions. Maybe he has to get back on. I hope you guys can hear me. Okay.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to keep going and maybe Chad will jump back on when he resolves his network problem. So let's see, TJ says, actually it looks like there's a web page with updated links except for current GOES MDS locations from the public VLAB site near the bottom. Zachary says, it should be possible to add a feature to the mission management tool to push notifications to each ROC for when a planned MDS image covers their region, if that would meet a need in the community. I don't know if anybody who can unmute themselves want to respond to that.
First, Dan, I wanted to, Sandy, so just mention that Chad said that he lost power due to high winds there down Fort Worth area. Okay,
fair enough. Thanks for that note. Let's just keep trucking. I may be able to answer some of these, and others on may be able to answer others. Caitlin, we were told we are not allowed to use the RAMB slider in Southern Region when on the Southern Region network. So that does limit us to the College of DuPage and other sites that offer satellite products. I'm guessing that must be due to the bandwidth required for slider, but that's good to know, Caitlin. Thank you. Jordan says, let's see if we can create a red book graphic with the outline of the Meso-Sector that can be rendered in AWIPS. Matt says 12Z is closer when Jeff goes to bed. Thanks, Matt. Kevin says, going back to the comment about not knowing where the Meso-Sectors are located, there's a text product in ADMSDM, which often includes Meso-Sector domain assignments, along with the question of WFO centers. Users can reference those messages, and if they see a nearby office listed or a risk area they're included in, they can load up the other resources to determine whether they're covered by all or part of the Meso. We really appreciate all these suggestions. I think this is a good way to get the word out on possible ways to find out where and if there's a meso domain. Someone whose name is not coming up for me says, Caitlin, there's a Ramsdis online page with canned looping MDS sectors. They can produce a lot less overhead than slider. That's true. I can provide a link of that once I'm done reading all these chats. Tim says, if you're wondering where the mesoscale sectors have been over the years, then he provides a link there at 46 after the hour if you want to bookmark that. Kevin says, example from today, MDS status. I don't know if that was an incomplete comment. TJ says, interesting, Caitlin. One really nice advantage of slider is you can do the feature following zoom, right? That's one of the features of slider if you've never played around with the controls on the left. Kevin says, goes east MDS2 will be located over 34 north, 100 west from 15Z the 29th for wildfire detection. So there you go. That's where it is, I guess, today. Jordan, we've pondered the idea of using the SBC concept of so-and-so for mesoscale sector images of the particular WFOs. Caitlin says, not necessarily if they ask for the meso privately, we just have to check the mesosector location page on VLab if we're wondering. Although recently there have been messages sent out on AWIPS to let us know where the meso is located and if it includes us, so that's been nice. Kevin says, if you guys have already read these, I'm sorry, I'm sort of repeating things, but Kevin says, regarding parallax, I don't love having software attempt to solve the issue. When I'm concerned about parallax, I view GOES data in AWIPS with some homemade scales, which are subsets of the full disk. It's a lot more useful for my mind to stand on the satellite and look at my WFO, easier for me to understand. Yeah, you know, Kevin, that's a good point. A few years ago in the HWT, we did have some it was basically a product that attempted to correct the visible for parallax, visible imagery. And it worked well if you had, say, an isolated storm, but it gets really complicated if you have a complex scene with a lot of, say, thin cirrus around or just a lot of, you know, junk clouds in the area. It really messes things up. So that's a good point, is maybe it's just better to train people on what to expect with parallax as opposed to trying to solve it with code. And then maybe last question, Matt says, I wonder if we could develop a tool to run on the local WFO AWIPS to determine if the area of an MDS intersects a CWA and create some kind of alert to the workstations. So great, a lot of really good ideas here. Maybe Kashad or somebody could capture all the chat and we could kind of make sure we don't lose all these good ideas for people that are working the AWIPS angle to look at. Oh, and one more comment from Jim. I've always wanted a shadow cursor set to adjust the location with a given parallax error. That's another good idea, Jim. All right, well, sorry for going so long, but I think that was a great discussion. I'm gonna stop there and pass it back to Jordan or anybody that wants to make some final comments.
All right, I'll take it from there. I know we're over, and I know a lot of you have dropped off already or are needing to drop off soon. But we thank everybody for being there. And even though I don't believe Chad can hear us any longer, thanks, Chad, for his very engaging presentation, and thanks, Dan, for moderating. There's a lot of good ideas. We are going to capture that. I'm going to talk to the TowerS team about what we might be able to do. There's probably some solutions that involve code changes to AWIPS, and we'll have to consider that. But it should be easy, I would think, to show or somehow inform WFOs when the mesoscale sector is over them. Anyway, I hope you're going to join us next week, a week from today, Thursday, November 4th. We're back at 12 noon Eastern time. Dr. T. Connor Nelson with CIRA and a GOES liaison with the NWS OPG is going to discuss satellite data in the 2021 OPG grassland fire weather experiment. If you have any questions in the meantime about satellite data or the Satellite Book Club, please reach out to our TowerS team at the addresses listed on the screen or via NWS chat. As always, we're looking for your feedback, so please let us know. Or if you want to present, we'd love to have you present. We've been able to keep this going week after week. I hope you've been enjoying it, and we'd love to have you contribute to the discussion. With that, I hope everybody's staying well, and we'll talk to everybody next week. Take care.